Last year, the UK saw the biggest tax-raising budget since 1993. Households felt it, businesses felt it, and the Labour government said it was necessary to stabilise the economy. But now, just a year later, we're heading for more. Rachel Reeves is preparing the 2025 budget, and while she hasn't said the word tax rises, the direction of travel is clear. The government's spending promises haven't gone away. The financial pressures haven't gone away. And the hole in the public finances hasn't gone away either. On the 4th of November, Chancellor Rachel Reeves gave a major speech telling the country that we must all do our bit. In simple terms, tax rises are coming. The important part wasn't what she said, but what she didn't say. She repeatedly avoided recommitting to Labour's key election promise not to raise income tax, VAT or national insurance. In politics, silence is sometimes the loudest signal. And it wasn't just her. Just a week earlier, on the 29th of October, during Prime Minister's questions, Kemi Badenoch directly asked Sir Keir Starmer whether he still stood by the same promise. The Prime Minister did not answer the question. He sidestepped it entirely.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, in its manifesto, Labour promised not to increase income tax, not to increase national insurance, and not to increase VAT. Does the Prime Minister still stand by his promises?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the Leader of the Opposition is now finally talking about the economy. I can update the House, Mr. Speaker. Retail sales are higher than expected. Inflation is lower than expected. Growth has been upgraded this year. And, Mr. Speaker, the UK stock market is at an all-time high. The budget is on the 26th of November and we will lay out our plans. But I can tell the House now that we will build a stronger economy, we will cut NHS waiting lists and deliver a better future for our country.
Well, Mr. Speaker. Yes. What a fascinating answer. It is not the same answer that I received when I asked exactly the same question, word for word, on the 9th of July. Then the Prime Minister replied with just one word, yes, and then he sat down with a smug grin on his face.
What makes this even more significant is that this isn't the first time the question's been asked. Back in July, Kemi Badenoch asked Sir Keir Starmer the exact same question, and his answer then was very different from the one he gave on the 29th of October. In July, he was firm, clear, confident, and most importantly, in July, he answered the question directly. But this time, he avoided the question entirely. Here's the exchange from July.
Mr. Speaker, in their manifesto last year, Labour promised not to increase income tax, not to increase national insurance, and not to increase VAT. Does the Prime Minister still stand by his promises?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, it is rare. It is rare, yes.
What a striking contrast between the two exchanges. Something clearly shifted between the 9th of July and the 29th of October. So in this video, we're going to break down what's actually being prepared, why the government is doing it, and what it means for you, whether you're working, retired, saving, or simply trying to manage rising costs. The Chancellor said she would do what was necessary to protect families from high inflation and interest rates, to protect our public services from a return to austerity, and ensure the economy is secure with debt under control. She added that we will all have to contribute to that effort. Each of us must do our bit for the security of our country and the brightness of its future. The Chancellor's speech appears to have removed any doubt over whether taxes will rise in the budget. Yet when pressed on which taxes might go up, Reeves refused to go into specifics. Instead, she began the work of explaining why a year after delivering a tax-raising budget and vowing not to come back for more, she is in fact coming back for more. The government is facing what Reeves calls a perfect storm of economic pressures. First, we have high inflation, currently sitting at around 3.8%, which is almost twice the Bank of England's target of 2%. This means prices have been rising faster than wages, so the value of every pound in your pocket has fallen, and people feel poorer even if they earn the same amount. Second, we are dealing with soaring debt interest, where the UK now spends 1 in every £10 of taxpayer money just on interest payments, not reducing the debt, not paying it down, simply servicing it, just to keep the system from tipping over. And third, the productivity of the country is low. The Office for Budget Responsibility is expected to confirm that Britain is producing less value for the hours we work. In simple terms, we're working hard, but the output of that work just isn't strong enough, and that creates a massive financial gap the government now feels it needs to fill. When productivity is weak, the government collects less tax. When less tax is collected, the budget gap grows. The gap is now so large that it needs to be filled. And the Chancellor's preparing to fill it with taxpayer money. There are two major tax changes being discussed that directly affect your take-home pay. Number one, the stealth tax, freezing tax bands until 2030. The first and perhaps most likely measure is the continuation or even expansion of the income tax threshold freeze. Chancellor Rachel Reeves is widely expected to extend the income tax threshold freeze in the budget. Under the previous government, both the personal allowance, that's £12,570, and the higher rate threshold of £50,270 were frozen until 2028. What began as a short-term measure has quietly become one of the Treasury's most profitable strategies. The influential Labour think tank, the Fabian Society, is urging Rachel Reeves to raise around £12 billion in next month's budget by extending the freeze on income tax thresholds for another 2 years. Jo Dromey, the Fabian's General Secretary, argues in a new report that the move is the best available option for the Chancellor as she seeks to offset the impact of weaker economic forecasts in her 26th of November statement. Here's why. When inflation rises and wages increase, frozen thresholds mean more people pay more higher rates of tax, even though their real purchasing power doesn't necessarily improve. This is what economists call fiscal drag. It doesn't raise the headline tax rate, but it effectively increases the tax burden. The freeze on income tax thresholds is effectively one of the biggest stealth tax rises in modern times. In a fair and balanced tax system, these thresholds would normally rise in line with inflation or with average wage growth. That way, people's real spending power, what their income can actually buy, would stay roughly the same after tax. But because the thresholds are frozen, inflation and pay rises push more of a person's income into higher tax brackets. So, even though your salary might go up on paper, you end up paying more tax while being able to buy less. That's what economists call fiscal drag. The system quietly drags more money from taxpayers simply because prices and wages have risen. Ultimately, this policy has a very real effect on living standards. As essentials like food, rent, and energy continue to rise in price, households find themselves losing a greater share of their income to tax. The result is that many people feel poorer, even if they're technically earning more. It's a subtle but powerful squeeze, one that erodes disposable income and leaves families worse off without a single tax rate being raised. The measure is also one of the most politically likely changes we'll see in the upcoming budget, precisely because it doesn't look like a tax rise. Extending the freeze on income tax thresholds allows the government to quietly increase tax revenues without the negative optics of announcing an outright hike. It's a strategy that appears neutral on the surface. No percentage rates are changing, yet it steadily pulls in billions more each year. That's why many economists refer to it as a stealth tax. And it's not just speculation. There are strong political signals that this policy could continue. As recently reported by the BBC, Sir Keir Starmer has refused to rule out extending the freeze on tax thresholds, which has seen millions of people dragged into paying higher tax rates. The freeze on national insurance and income tax thresholds introduced under the Conservatives is currently due to end in April 2028. But asked during Prime Minister's questions whether the government still planned to lift the freeze, Sir Keir only said he was committed to Labour's election manifesto. That included a pledge not to raise national insurance, income tax or VAT, but no specific promise on thresholds. Tax thresholds, the income levels at which people start paying national insurance or income tax, or have to pay higher rates, typically increased every year in line with inflation. However, income tax thresholds have been frozen since 2021-22. This means people risk being dragged into a higher tax band or paying tax on their income for the first time if they get a pay rise. Extending the freeze until 2029-2030 could raise an estimated £7 billion a year. Extending the tax threshold freeze is politically the path of least resistance. It allows the government to raise billions in additional revenue without breaking its manifesto pledge not to increase income tax rates. Most people don't immediately feel or recognise this as a tax rise because nothing about the headline rates changes. Yet over time, more of their income quietly slips into higher tax brackets. For that reason alone, it's one of the most likely options on the table. Subtle enough to avoid major backlash, yet powerful enough to help fill the budget's black hole. In the simplest of terms, as your income rises with inflation, you get pushed into higher tax brackets and you pay more tax without any new law ever being passed. This is how fiscal drag works. It's invisible. It's extremely effective for the government. The second, and potentially the most politically costly, change is the possible rise in the basic rate of income tax. This is the very tax Labour promised in its election manifesto not to touch, a promise that played a key role in securing their landslide victory. So if they now raise the basic rate, they are not just increasing taxes, they're breaking the central pledge that they asked the country to trust them on, making this a move with serious political consequences. A plan to increase income tax rates and lower national insurance rates by 2 percentage points is thought to be one of the front runners. On Friday, The Times reported that Reeves was considering limiting the national insurance cut to basic rate taxpayers, earning up to £50,270, to ensure that those with the broadest shoulders bore the biggest burden. According to an article from The Guardian, if government wanted to change income tax, the most straightforward option would be to add 1% to the basic rate of tax, increasing it from 20 to 21%, says Laura Souter, the Director of Personal Finance at AJ Bell. That will cost taxpayers up to £377 a year in extra tax, with anyone earning £50,270 or more facing the maximum hit. Every year, HM Revenue and Customs, HMRC, models the impact of upping income tax, and its sums show that adding 1% to the basic rate would raise an extra £6.9 billion in 2026-27 and a total of £23.4 billion over the next 3 years. For someone earning £35,000 a year, roughly the average income of a UK adult, an extra 1% on income tax would make their annual tax bill rise from £4,486 to £4,710, an increase of £224. For families already stretched by food prices, rent, mortgages, energy bills, that matters. Moving on to pensioners. For many pensioners, retirement is built on careful planning, decades of saving, contributing, and trusting that the system will hold. The changes now being considered strike at the emotional core of that trust. Of all of the groups in society, pensioners may feel the impact most. Pensioners do not pay national insurance, so those 2 up, 2 down options where the government tries to soften the blow by cutting national insurance do absolutely nothing for pensioners. They only affect workers. That means any rise in income tax falls directly and fully onto pensioners' income with no offset or relief. So if the basic rate goes up by 1%, 2% or more, pensioners simply pay more, full stop. In simple terms, pensioners get the pain, but not the offsetting benefit. In addition to this, there's the triple lock paradox. The state pension is protected under the triple lock and is rising. However, the tax-free personal allowance is frozen. By 2027, the state pension will be higher than the tax-free allowance, meaning millions of pensioners will pay income tax on their state pension for the first time. This is unprecedented. Private pension lump sums may be cut. Many retirees rely on the 25% tax-free lump sum from their private pension. There are discussions about cutting this, meaning retirees could lose thousands of pounds. Savings also appear to be in the crosshairs of this year's budget. Savings represent patience. They represent saying not now to many smaller desires in order to say yes to something bigger later. A home, a family, a safer retirement. Policies that make saving harder strike at a value many people quietly live by. Sacrifice now for security later. When saving becomes harder, future feels less steady. Millions of people rely on cash ISAs to save for a deposit or retirement. The annual tax-free allowance is currently £20,000. There are discussions about cutting it to £10,000. This would make saving for a first home harder, saving for retirement slower, building financial security more challenging. In other words, the system is changing in ways that make it harder to build wealth over time. Why now? The government argues this is necessary to restore stability, to rebuild public services, to pay down debt, to protect the long-term economy. The message is, this is what's right, not what is popular. But this raises a deeper question. If these tax rises happen now, what happens next year or the year after? If you remember, after her first budget in 2024, Rachel Reeves promised that she wouldn't be back for more. That budget raised around £40 billion in new taxes, the largest tax increase since 1993, and she described it as a once-in-a-parliament reset. She said the public finances were now in order and suggested that no further major tightening would be needed.
You understand why I'm asking you this? Because people are going to be a bit nervous. She said this before, then she discovered it was a problem. Will we discover in 2 years' time that there's some reason why they've got to go up?
No.
Or is this an absolute commitment?
It's an absolute commitment. But let me just say this. We've now wiped the slate clean under the mismanagement and the chaos of the previous government. It's now on us. We've put everything out into the open.
Okay.
We've set the spending envelope for the course of this parliament. We don't need to come back for more. We've done that now. We've wiped the slate clean.
So you're saying, actually, there's not going to be an Oliver Twist moment. You're not going to come back and say, we want another tax rise. Or if you did, that would be a huge failure for your government, wouldn't it?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to be able to write 5 years' worth of budgets on this show today, but what we have
I'm just
done,
saying,
there's
will
no
there
need.
be more tax rises?
No, you're right, Trevor. There is no need to come back with another budget like this. We never need to do that again. We've now, Trevor, set the spending envelope for the remainder of this parliament. We don't need to increase taxes further. We need to do two things now. We need to reform our public services to make sure they work better, and we need to grow our economy.
In 2024, Rachel Reeves told the country that the public finances had been reset. She said she would not come back for more. Yet, here we are, 1 year later, being told that we must all do our bit again. And at this point, it stops being just about the numbers. It becomes an issue of trust and credibility. When a government promises one thing to win an election and then begins signalling something very different once in power, people notice, voters remember. And trust, once weakened, is incredibly hard to rebuild. So the question many people will now be asking is simple. If she didn't keep her promise last time, why should anyone believe her this time? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.